The light of the late afternoon sun was a master painter, casting long golden brushstrokes across our dining room. It was my favorite time of day, a moment suspended between the hustle of the world outside and the sanctuary I'd built within these walls. The light touched everything with a gentle reverence: the aged oak of the dining table, the slightly mismatched chairs we'd collected over the years, the vibrant, chaotic finger paintings by our son, Leo, that I'd framed and hung on the wall. The air itself was thick with contentment, scented with the comforting aroma of rosemary roasted chicken, a recipe my grandmother had sworn was a cure for any sorrow. It mingled with the sweet, almost impossibly delicate fragrance of the pale pink roses Tom had brought home yesterday, for no reason at all other than that he'd seen them and thought of me. My gaze drifted to him now. Tom. My Tom. His brow furrowed in concentration as he patiently guided our 7-year-old's hand, showing him how to cut his chicken into a perfect, manageable square. Leo, a miniature version of his father with the same unruly brown hair and earnest eyes, watched with rapt attention. A quiet, unbidden smile formed on my lips. It was these small, unscripted moments that formed the mosaic of my happiness. This was the life I had so carefully, so hopefully, pieced together. A life of steadfast love and quiet, unassuming joy. Opposite me, my sister Lily laughed. Her laughter had been the soundtrack to my life for as long as I could remember, a bright, bubbling spring of sound. But tonight it seemed thinner, a little strained perhaps. She was more than just my sister. She was the keeper of my childhood secrets, my fiercest defender, my other half. We'd navigated everything together, from scraped knees to broken hearts. Her presence at our dinner table was a given, as natural and necessary as the air I breathed. She was Leo's adored Auntie Lily, the one who indulged his wildest stories and praised his artistic endeavors with an enthusiasm that even I sometimes struggled to muster. And then, Leo announced, his voice muffled by a mouthful of mashed potatoes, Mrs. Davison told me my velociraptor looked like a very grumpy lizard who had swallowed a watermelon. Tom let out a deep, warm chuckle that vibrated through the table. It was a sound that had always felt like coming home. Well, she's not wrong about the grumpy part, champ, but I'd call it a masterpiece of prehistoric angst. Auntie Lily said it was the best, most ferocious dinosaur she had ever seen in her entire life, Leo declared, his chest puffing out with pride as he beamed at her. The absolute best, Lily agreed, her smile flashing bright. But as I watched her, my own smile faltered for a fraction of a second. There it was again, something I'd been subconsciously noticing for weeks. A faint bruised shadow beneath her eyes that no amount of concealer could completely hide. A subtle tension in her shoulders, as if she were bracing for an impact. I'd told myself it was her job. The architectural firm she worked for was demanding, the hours unforgiving. I made a mental note to draw her a warm bath after dinner, to force her to relax. I would not let the pressures of the world dim my sister's light. I took a slow sip of water, the cool liquid a contrast to the warmth in my chest. A profound wave of gratitude washed over me, so potent it was almost dizzying. This was it, everything I had ever dreamed of, right here in this room. A husband whose love was my anchor, a child whose laughter was my favorite song, and a sister who was my twin soul. We were a fortress, the four of us. Impenetrable. Unshakable. The very thought was a comfort so deep it settled in my bones. The lively chatter softened, fading into a comfortable domestic silence. The only sounds were the soft, rhythmic clinking of forks against porcelain plates and the gentle hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. It was a peaceful sound, the sound of a family at ease. It was in that pocket of serene quiet that Leo, with the unthinking, innocent precision of a child, picked up a metaphorical cannonball and aimed it directly at the heart of our perfect world. He placed his small fork down on the table with a careful, deliberate clink. He looked at me, his head tilted, his expression one of genuine, unfiltered curiosity. Then his gaze shifted to his father. "Mom?" he asked, his voice ringing with a startling clarity in the quiet room. "Can I ask a real question?" "Of course, my love. You can ask anything," I said, my smile still in place, a placid mask of maternal warmth. He didn't look at me as he spoke again. His eyes were fixed on Tom. "Daddy, why is Auntie Lily always in your car? When you pick me up from soccer practice, she's in the front seat, but she never gets out. She just waits." Time didn't just stop. It shattered. The warm, honeyed light seemed to instantly turn cold and sterile. The comforting scent of rosemary was suddenly cloying, suffocating. The very air in the room grew thick and heavy. pressing down on my chest and making it impossible to draw a full breath. My smile felt like it was cracking, a fragile piece of glass about to break. I turned my head slowly, mechanically, toward my husband. Tom's face, usually so open and cheerful, was a ghostly shade of white. His easy posture had evaporated, leaving behind a man made of stone, his shoulders rigid, his hands frozen on the table. But it was Lily's reaction that plunged a shard of ice into my heart. Her eyes, wide and terrified, were locked on her plate as if it were an abyss that might swallow her whole. Her hand, the one holding her fork, began to tremble. A small, barely perceptible tremor at first, then a violent, uncontrollable shaking. And then, with a sharp, discordant clatter that seemed to echo into infinity, the fork slipped from her grasp, striking the plate and shattering the silence and my world into a million irreparable pieces. The sharp clatter of Lily's fork didn't just echo in the room. It seemed to reverberate inside my own skull, a sound that signaled the collapse of everything I held dear. In the deafening silence that followed, 1,000 frantic thoughts collided in my mind, each one more painful than the last. The world narrowed to the three faces at the table. Leo's, a mask of pure, innocent confusion. Tom's, ashen and frozen, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the wall. And Lily's, her head bowed, her hair falling like a curtain to hide her face, her shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. My first instinct was denial. A fierce, protective wave of it surged through me. Leo was a child. He had an overactive imagination. He must have been mistaken, confused a different car, a different day. Children did that. I almost laughed, a hysterical, brittle sound. I wanted to reach across the table to smooth the worry from my son's brow and say, "Oh, sweetie, what a funny story. Auntie Lily wishes she had time to be chauffeured around." But I couldn't. I couldn't because the guilt radiating from my husband and my sister was a physical force. It was a noxious gas, poisoning the air, making my lungs burn. It was in the way Tom refused to meet my gaze, the way his knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of the table. It was in the single, glistening tear that fell from Lily's chin and landed on the pristine white of the tablecloth, a tiny, perfect circle of shame. They weren't just surprised. They were caught. The roasted chicken on my plate, once so appetizing, now looked grotesque. The scent of the roses turned cloying and funereal. The beautiful, warm light I had cherished just moments ago now felt like a harsh, interrogating spotlight, exposing every crack in the foundation of my life. My heart, which had been a warm, steady drum, was now a frantic, panicked bird, beating its wings against the cage of my ribs. It was Leo's small, wavering voice that broke the spell a second time. "Mommy," he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "Why is Auntie Lily crying? Did I say something bad?" A jolt of protective energy shot through me, momentarily overriding the cold dread. I turned to him, forcing a smile onto my lips that felt like a painful grimace. My own voice sounded alien and strained when I spoke. "No, my love. Of course not. You didn't say anything bad at all." I reached out and stroked his hair, my hand trembling slightly. "Auntie Lily is just very tired. And Mommy and Daddy need to talk to her about some boring grown-up things. Could you do me a big favor and go to your room to finish that amazing T-Rex drawing? I want to see it when you're done." He looked from me to Tom, then to Lily's bowed head, his brow wrinkled with a 7-year-old's attempt to understand an adult world that had suddenly become frightening. He nodded slowly, slid off his chair, and padded out of the room. The sound of his small footsteps receding down the hall was like the ticking of a clock, counting down the last seconds of my old life. The moment he was gone, the fragile dam of my composure broke. I pulled my hand back as if the table were on fire. The forced smile vanished. My gaze, cold and sharp, landed on Tom. "Look at me," I commanded. My voice wasn't a request. It was a blade. He flinched, but his eyes, filled with a misery so profound it almost made me pity him, slowly lifted to meet mine. "And you," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper as I turned to my sister. She was still crying, her face hidden. "Lily, stop hiding. Look. At me." Slowly, painfully, she raised her head. Her face was a wreck. Her eyes were red-rimmed and pleading, her cheeks streaked with mascara. She looked utterly broken. A part of me, the part that had loved her for a lifetime, wanted to rush to her side and hold her. But a newer, colder part of me held me cemented in my chair. The silence stretched again, thick with unspoken words and devastating truths. I let it hang there, a weapon of its own. Finally, I spoke, my voice devoid of all its earlier warmth. "My son asked a question. A very simple one. And I would like an answer. Not from a child's imagination, but from the two people I trust most in this world. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Why, Tom, is my sister always waiting for you in your car? He opened his mouth, then closed it. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing that now seemed like a pathetic attempt to stall. Sarah, it's not what you think. It's complicated. Complicated? I let out a short, sharp laugh devoid of any humor. It was a sound of pure disbelief. That's the best you can do? I think it sounds remarkably simple. You pick up our son from school and my sister is in your car, hiding. So, explain it to me. Uncomplicate it. Tell me a story that makes sense. Tell me a story that doesn't involve my husband and my sister betraying me in the most sickening way imaginable. Please. I begged, the last word cracking with the first fissure of my own heartbreak. I'm waiting. Tom's words, "It's not what you think," hung in the air between us, useless and infuriating. They were the oldest, most transparent lines in the book of betrayal, and hearing them from my own husband's lips was like being doused in gasoline. My grief was instantly ignited into a blazing, white-hot rage. The pain was still there, a cold, heavy stone in my gut, but the anger was a shield, a weapon. It was the only thing holding me upright. Not what I think? I repeated, my voice dangerously low. And what is it you imagine I'm thinking, Tom? Tell me. I'd love to hear your interpretation of my thoughts right now. Am I thinking that my husband, the man I built a life with, has been sneaking around with my sister, the woman who was supposed to be my maid of honor, my son's godmother, my other half? Am I thinking that the two of you have been lying to my face, day after day, in my own home? Am I thinking that our entire life, this dinner, this family, is a lie? I was leaning forward now, my hands pressed flat on the table. Every fiber of my being was screaming. I saw him flinch, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading look that only infuriated me more. "Sarah, please," he stammered, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Just let me explain. It's not an affair. I swear to you, on Leo's life, on our life, it is not what you are thinking." The mention of our son's name was another spark on the pyre. "Don't you dare," I hissed, pointing a trembling finger at him. "Don't you dare bring our son into this. Not now. Not when you've been conducting your complicated business in the front seat of your car while he sits in the back." My gaze snapped to Lily. She was still a statue of misery, tears streaming silently down her face. Her silence was somehow more damning than any lie Tom could spin. It was the silence of guilt, of a coward who couldn't face the wreckage she had helped create. "And you," I said, my voice dripping with a venom I didn't know I possessed. "Have you lost your voice, Lily? All those years, all those secrets we shared, all those nights we stayed up talking about our futures? Was this the future you had in mind for us? You, my sister, reduced to waiting in a car like some cheap mistress? Hiding from your own nephew?" "It's not like that, Sarah," she finally whispered, her voice so broken it was barely audible. "It's not, I promise you." "Then what is it like?" I shot back, my voice rising. "Enlighten me. I am standing here in the rubble of my life, and I am asking for an explanation. A real one, not platitudes and empty promises. We've been going to appointments," Tom said, his voice strained. He looked at Lily, a quick panicked glance as if seeking permission. Lily needed help. She couldn't do it alone. I was helping her. The word appointments landed like a punch to the gut. It was so flimsy, so insulting in its vagueness. My mind, already primed for the worst, twisted it into something ugly and sordid. I let out that same horrifyingly bitter laugh. "Appointments? Is that what you're calling them now? How clever, how discreet. And you, Tom, always so helpful. Always the good guy. Were these morning appointments? Afternoon appointments? Tell me, did they have specific names? Did you have a favorite spot?" "Stop it!" Tom's voice cracked like a whip. He stood up so abruptly his chair scraped backward against the floor. "It's not what you're making it out to be. This isn't some sordid romance. This is serious." "Oh, I agree," I said, standing to face him, my whole body vibrating with adrenaline. "This is very, very serious. But I think our definitions of serious are quite different right now." "Sarah, you have to listen," Lily pleaded, finding her voice again. "You have to let us tell you the truth." "The truth?" I scoffed, turning on her again. "The truth doesn't hide in cars. The truth doesn't make my sister drop her fork and my husband turn into a ghost. The truth doesn't wait for a 7-year-old to expose it over dinner. Whatever you've been doing, you've been hiding it. And people only hide things they're ashamed of. I paced back and forth, the beautiful, cozy dining room now feeling like a cage. My mind was racing, replaying months of tiny, insignificant moments that now seemed like giant, waving red flags. Lily canceling our weekly lunch dates, claiming she was swamped with work. Tom being late from the office, saying he was stuck in traffic. The hushed phone calls, the sudden silences when I entered a room. It was all there. A breadcrumb trail leading to this single, devastating moment. I stopped and faced them both, my decision hardening into a cold, solid resolve. I want you to leave, Lily. What? She choked out, her eyes widening in genuine shock. You heard me. I want you to get your things, and I want you to get out of my house, I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. It was the only way I could get the words out without screaming. I can't look at you right now. I can't have you under my roof. Sarah, no, you don't understand, Tom begged, stepping towards me. You can't do this. Just give us 5 minutes. Let us explain everything. You've had months of 5 minutes, it seems, I retorted, taking a step back from him. Your time is up. My eyes found Lily's again. Get out. The 2 words, get out, hung in the air, cold and sharp as icicles. They were the most brutal words I had ever spoken, and they were aimed at the person I had loved longer than anyone else on earth, besides my parents. Seeing the raw, wounded shock on Lily's face should have brought me some sort of vindictive satisfaction. It should have felt like a justified blow, a small measure of revenge for the immense pain I was drowning in. But it didn't. It just felt like I was breaking a piece of my own soul. Lily crumpled as if I had physically struck her. Her hands flew to her mouth, and a sob, a real heart-wrenching sob, tore from her throat. She stumbled back, shaking her head, her eyes screaming a silent plea that I was determined to ignore. Tom rushed to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder as she swayed. His touch, a gesture of support for her, was another twist of the knife in my heart. Sarah, you're not thinking clearly, Tom said, his voice urgent, desperate. You're in shock. Don't say things you'll regret. Please, just listen. The time for listening is over, I stated, my voice as hard as stone. I crossed my arms over my chest, a physical barrier against them, against the truth I was so sure I knew. The time for secrets and lies is over. I want her gone. But Lily didn't move. She just stood there, supported by my husband's hand, and looked at me. And through her tears, I saw something else begin to surface. It wasn't guilt anymore. It was a flicker of something stronger, something that looked almost like resolve. She took a shuddering breath, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and seemed to pull herself together with a strength I didn't know she possessed. No, she said, her voice trembling but firm. I'm not leaving. Not like this. You can hate me, Sarah. You can scream at me and throw me out of your house forever. You have every right. But you will not do it without knowing the truth. I will not let you do that to yourself or to us. Tom looked at her, his expression a mixture of fear and relief. He gave her shoulder a slight, almost imperceptible squeeze, then looked at me. She's right, Sarah. We were wrong. We were so wrong to hide this from you. We were cowards, but we did it to protect you. I laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Protect me? You call this protection? Look at me. I'm shattered. How, in God's name, was this supposed to protect me? It was then that Lily did something that completely disarmed me. She walked slowly, deliberately, to her purse, which was sitting on a side table by the window. Her movements were heavy, as if every step cost her a monumental effort. She fumbled inside for a moment, her back still to me. I watched, my anger faltering, replaced by a cold, creeping sense of dread. This wasn't part of the script I had written in my head. Liars didn't act like this. When she turned around, she was holding a folded piece of paper, a thick, official-looking document. She didn't hand it to me. She just held it in her shaking hands, her knuckles white. We weren't having an affair, Lily said, her voice now eerily calm, emptied of all its earlier panic. Tom hasn't been my lover. He's been my driver. He's been my support system. He's been the one to hold my hand in waiting rooms and to sit with me for hours while I get my treatments, because I was too terrified to tell you and too weak to go by myself. My mind refused to process the words. Treatments? What treatments? Tom was the one who answered, his voice thick with unshed tears. The appointments, Sarah. They weren't dates. They were chemotherapy sessions. The world tilted on its axis. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. Chemotherapy. The word was a violent explosion in the silent room, obliterating everything I thought I knew. It was a word from a different world, a world of sterile hospital corridors and hushed, fearful whispers. It didn't belong here, in my warm, sunlit dining room. It didn't belong to Lily, not my vibrant, laughing, full-of-life sister. My eyes darted from Tom's grief-stricken face to Lily, who was now unfolding the paper. She held it out for me to see. It was a letter from an oncologist. I didn't need to read it. The bold, black letterhead, St. Jude's Cancer Center, was all I saw. The words below it blurred into an incomprehensible jumble. Ovarian cancer, stage 3, aggressive. I didn't want you to know, Lily whispered, the piece of paper trembling in her hand. I found out 2 months ago. You were so happy, Sarah. Your life with Tom and Leo. It's so perfect. I couldn't be the one to bring this darkness into your world. I saw how you looked at me, how you looked at your family. I couldn't bear to see that look change to pity, to fear. Her voice broke. I was a coward. I know that. So I asked Tom for help. I swore him to secrecy. He fought me on it. He told me every single day that we had to tell you, but I begged him not to. He would drive me to the hospital, wait for me during the sessions because the chemo makes me so sick I can't drive myself home. He'd pick up Leo from school on those days because I was too weak to even get out of the car. He was trying to honor my stupid, terrified wish. He was trying to protect both of us. The anger inside me didn't just vanish. It was extinguished, instantly and completely, leaving behind a cold, desolate vacuum. The story I had built, the one of betrayal and deceit, collapsed into dust, revealing the horrifying, tragic truth that lay beneath. It wasn't my husband's infidelity. It was my sister's mortality, and I had been screaming at them while they were living through hell. The letterhead from the cancer center seemed to burn itself onto my retinas. For a long, silent moment, I could do nothing but stare at it, my mind a complete and utter blank. The entire architecture of my reality had been demolished in a single sentence. The anger, the jealousy, the righteous fury that had been coursing through my veins just seconds before had vanished so completely it felt as if it had never been there at all. In its place was a vast, cold, horrifying emptiness. My legs, which had been so firmly planted in my indignation, suddenly felt like they were made of sand. I reached out a hand, grasping the back of my chair to keep from collapsing. The sound of my own breathing was ragged and loud in the silent room. I looked from the paper to Lily's face. I really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw everything. It wasn't just tiredness in her eyes. It was a bone-deep weariness, the exhaustion of someone fighting a war inside their own body. The faint shadows under her eyes weren't from long hours at the office. They were the bruises of chemotherapy, the slight tremble in her hands, the way she'd been pushing food around her plate. It wasn't a lack of appetite. It was nausea. The weight she had lost, which I had complimented her on just last week, now looked terrifyingly significant. All the signs had been there, screaming at me, but I had been so wrapped up in my own perfect, happy world that I had interpreted them through the most selfish lens imaginable. My gaze shifted to Tom. I saw the profound sadness in his eyes, the heavy weight of the secret he had been forced to carry. He wasn't a traitor. He was a protector, caught in an impossible situation, trying to honor the wish of a terrified woman he loved like his own sister, while also trying not to break the heart of his wife. He had been walking a tightrope of silent agony. The silence was finally broken by a sound from me. It was a low, guttural moan, a sound of pure, undiluted anguish that came from the deepest part of my being. The sound of my own heart breaking, not from betrayal, but from a guilt so profound it threatened to swallow me whole. Lily, I whispered. Her name was a fragile thing on my lips. I let go of the chair and stumbled forward, my legs clumsy and uncoordinated. I didn't even realize I was moving until I was standing in front of her. I reached out and my fingers brushed against the cold, official paper. She let it fall from her grasp and it fluttered to the floor, a white flag of surrender in a war I didn't even know was being fought. I looked into her eyes, my sister's eyes, and saw not a betrayer, but a terrified young woman facing the fight of her life, completely alone. And I had been screaming at her. I had been casting her out. Oh God, I breathed, and my own tears, hot and shameful, finally began to fall. Lily, what have I done? I didn't wait for an answer. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her into an embrace so fierce it was almost violent. I held onto her as if she were the only solid thing in a world that was spinning out of control. She was so thin. I could feel the sharp edges of her shoulder blades beneath her sweater. She felt fragile like a bird. She collapsed against me, her body shaking with the sobs she had been holding back. And I just held her, my face buried in her hair, repeating her name over and over like a prayer. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Lily. I'm so sorry. Tom stepped forward, and I felt his hands on both our shoulders, a warm, steady pressure. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, his own quiet tears falling, anchoring us as we were tossed in this maelstrom of grief and regret. The three of us stood in the center of the dining room, no longer accuser and accused, but a broken, terrified family, clinging to each other in the wreckage. The beautiful dinner was forgotten, growing cold on the table. The perfect, sunlit world I had cherished was gone forever. But as I held my sister, I realized that in the ashes of that old life, something new was beginning to form. Not the perfect, easy happiness of before, but something far more powerful. Something forged in truth, tempered by sacrifice, and bound by a love that was about to be tested in ways we could never have imagined. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. But now she wouldn't be fighting it alone. The months that followed that devastating dinner were a blur of antiseptic smells, hushed consultations, and the relentless, rhythmic beeping of hospital machines. Our lives rearranged themselves completely, not around school schedules and work deadlines, but around chemotherapy cycles and blood counts. The warm, sunlit dining room, once the heart of our home, was often quiet now. The new heart of our home became Lily's bedside, whether that was in her own small apartment, which I had all but moved into, or in the sterile, beige room of the oncology ward. My guilt from that night never fully disappeared. It became a permanent part of me, a quiet, humming reminder of my own blindness. But over time, it transformed. It was no longer a destructive force, but a motivating one. It fueled the long nights I spent awake, holding a basin for her as the chemo ravaged her body. It drove me to research every possible side effect, every clinical trial, every holistic therapy that might offer her a sliver of comfort. It softened my voice and gave me a patience I never knew I possessed. My anger at Tom had dissolved into a profound, aching gratitude. I saw him not as a man who had kept a secret from me, but as a man who had carried a terrible burden for me. Our love, once based on shared joys and easy laughter, was now forged in the fires of shared hardship, and it emerged stronger and more resilient than I could have ever imagined. There were good days. Days when Lily's laughter, though weaker, would once again fill a room. We would sit on the couch, wrapped in blankets, and watch old movies. Leo, with a child's beautiful lack of complication, would crawl up next to her, not seeing a sick person, but just his Auntie Lily. He would draw her pictures, not of dinosaurs anymore, but of suns and flowers and the three of us holding hands, a silent, powerful testament to his own kind of love. On those days, we could almost pretend we were a normal family again. And there were bad days. Days so dark it felt like the sun would never rise again. Days when the pain was too much and the hope felt like a cruel joke. On those days, I would simply hold her hand, my presence a silent promise that she was not, and would never again be, alone in her fear. One evening, about 4 months into her treatment, I was sitting with her while she slept. The chemo had taken her hair, but to me she had never been more beautiful. Her face, pale and unadorned, showed the fierce warrior spirit within. Tom came in quietly, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He handed one to me and sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes on his sleeping sister-in-law. "How is she?" he whispered. "She's sleeping," I replied, my voice equally low. The new medication helps with the nausea. We sat in a comfortable silence, the kind of silence that no longer needed to be filled. It was a silence built of shared understanding. I still think about that night, I confessed, looking into my mug. I think about the things I said, the way I looked at you both. Tom reached out and covered my hand with his. His touch was warm and steady. "And I think about how we should have told you from the start," he said. "We were trying to protect you, Sarah, but we were wrong. Secrets, even when they come from a place of love, they build walls. We almost let that wall become permanent." I looked at my sister, her chest rising and falling in a slow, even rhythm. Her fight was far from over. The road ahead was uncertain, a path shrouded in fog. We didn't know what the future held. The perfect, easy life I had once cherished was gone, and it was never coming back. But as I sat there, holding my husband's hand and watching over my sister, I realized that what we had now was infinitely more real. It wasn't the picture-perfect illusion of happiness, but the messy, painful, beautiful and unbreakable reality of love. It was choosing to show up, to hold a hand in the dark, to face the storm together. The greatest betrayals are not always the ones we imagine. Sometimes the deepest wounds are inflicted by the truths we fail to see and the secrets we keep to protect those we love most. The lesson from that terrible night was not about infidelity, but about the immense, hidden battles people fight behind smiling faces. It was a reminder to look closer, to listen harder, and to lead with compassion, because you never truly know the weight someone else is carrying. Before you let suspicion harden your heart, ask. Before you build a wall of anger, open a door of communication. Because the fortress of a family is not built on perfection, but on the courage to be vulnerable, the strength to forgive, and the unwavering promise to face whatever comes, together.